A lot of people today say that the border is out of control. But let's not forget why Latin America became so unstable over the last decade. As long as there is instability in Latin America, there will be an influx of people to the United States. These are no longer Mexicans coming here to work. Now you have people leaving countries like Venezuela and Haiti, people who are arriving here in the hands of criminal organizations. Welcome back to our channel. On today's video, we're going to talk about the mess that is immigration into the United States in the year 2024. Things are definitely in the worst condition they've ever been for immigration into the United States. There was a time in the past where millions of people, predominantly from Mexico, would come into the United States to work for seasons, and they would return back to Mexico, and it was really a mutual benefit situation. The Mexicans could earn more money in the United States, and the United States had access to a labor force that was reliable, affordable, and had very little liability for the companies that were using these workers. But soon, both the Obama administration as well as the Trump administration started to have a different view on immigration. In his last day in office, Obama removed the wet foot, dry foot law, which was allowing Cubans to come to the United States and easily obtain legal status simply by arriving. Clearly, the reason Obama did this was because the Cubans were voting Republican. On the other hand, he went as far as legalizing temporarily people of Mexican descent because they, through the Dreamers Act, were most likely to vote Democrat. And of course, today Republican politicians push anti-immigrant legislation or rhetoric because they know it's also going to give them votes. So clearly neither Republicans nor Democrats give a crap about immigrants. The only thing they care about is their votes, so they can win and have power. Just like Republicans have gone on a war against Mexicans, Democrats have gone on a war against Cubans, for example. It hasn't been about what's better for the United States. It hasn't been about protecting the integrity of the country. The only real goal that these politicians have is making sure that they can please the crowds so that they can get voted into power. So after decades of horrific immigration policies, now the United States has reached the absolute pinnacle of garbage legislation, catering more to the public, more concerned about who's voting than what actually benefits the United States. We recently visited the country of Canada, right next door to the United States. Their country has some of the best immigration policies. In some regions of the country, they have a temporary Mexican presence during the growing seasons where people come to Canada to work and then they leave when they're done. It benefits Canada in agriculture and it benefits Mexico in access to a good paying labor force. Again, it's a mutual benefit situation. A situation that corresponds more to the United States geographically, but it's Canada and Mexico reaping the benefit of this situation, even though conclusively we could say that this situation should be benefiting the United States, not Canada. Canada does not have a large Latino population, but in the sectors of agriculture during this growing seasons, there's a lot of people who go to Canada just to work. The same can be said about the Asian communities in Canada. Talented, well-educated, and wealthy individuals, mostly of Asian backgrounds like Indians, are ending up in Canada, and they have created some of the most prosperous communities in North America. This is what the suburbs of Toronto look like. Fast-growing, wealthy metropolitan areas with educated people, high-income earners, some of the safest cities in North America. By homicide rate, Canada's immigrant communities are the safest places in all of North and South America. And these are communities that were built on the backs of immigrants who came to Canada to make a brighter future. Immigrants that in theory should have came to the United States instead. But once again, Canada is the one reaping the benefit of these immigrants because the United States doesn't open the door for them. But even when they have the opportunity to come to the United States, they're most likely going to choose Canada. in the United States, they're being mistreated, they're being disrespected, they're socially outcast, and they're being extorted by law enforcement agencies as a systematic thing. And this is happening from San Diego, California, where I've talked to business owners who are telling me that they have to pay the police department for quote unquote protection. Basically, these are immigration exploitation rackets. The law enforcement in the United States is extorting Asian business owners. In West Virginia, we saw where an entire situation took place that ended up with law enforcement showing up to a business of Asians that had done absolutely nothing wrong and then demanding money from the business owners. And if you move into rural areas, it gets even worse for Asian American business owners, where small town rural or the good old boys are most likely going to make sure that if there's any Asian businesses competing with their buddies, they're going to have more inspections, they're going to have more fines, and sometimes they're literally ran out of business from small communities. For the most part, when Asian business owners start up a business in the United States, they have to first figure out who's going to extort them, how much they're going to want, and if it's going to be viable for them to have a business in some places, since in a lot of situations, they simply get ran out. And if they're not getting ran out, they're paying a hefty extortion to law enforcement. So while these Asians are legally in the United States, many times they're U.S. citizens, before they're allowed to operate within a community, law enforcement extorts them or charges them, as they call in Mexico, piso or plaza. In other words, you're being charged or extorted to be able to have your business. So without a doubt, that's why most Asians are going to end up in Canada, where they know that at least they're not going to be extorted by law enforcement, even though they have legal status and they have the funds to create businesses, which raises another question. These individuals are not allowing the United States to prosper the way it should, or many times in the United States, it's not the viability of a business that allows it to stay in business, but rather are the local entities going to allow you to have that business. And that right there is clearly detrimental to the economy of the United States. And it has very little to do with Republican or Democrat. Again, I've talked to individuals who are in cities like San Diego that are being extorted by law enforcement for their businesses to be quote unquote safe, as well as in rural communities like in West Virginia. And without a doubt, while living in Alabama, that is exactly the system that's in place. Before the sentiment of Americans changed against immigrants and those coming illegally to do work, migrant workers, the situation was actually a mutual benefit situation, and the United States was able to see incredible growth. Housing was affordable, but today we're in a different situation, as the labor force of Mexicans and Central Americans that was present in the United States is today completely gone. These are individuals who were already in the United States for many years. They knew English, they had established trades, and they were helping in the construction fields and other sectors of the economy. They were a massive percentage of the U.S. economy came directly through the hands of undocumented workers. Predominantly, these were Mexicans. However, after the Obama and Trump administration and their efforts to go after immigrants and large deportations, for example, Obama on one hand giving people the DREAM Act and on the other hand having some of the largest numbers of deportations ever, Mexicans decided that they were no longer going to come to the United States. Now, that void was temporarily filled with Guatemalans, Salvadorians, and other people from Central America. In the case of Panama and Costa Rica, it's actually more Americans moving to those countries than there are people from those countries coming over here. Central America's economy has been improving with globalization, and now Mexico, with the return of their skilled labor force and the idea and vision to make their country better and not depend on migration to the United States, has actually made Mexico a better country, to the point that many of the people that initially were coming to the United States are now also staying in Mexico permanently. With Mexico becoming the next global powerhouse, we've seen people that initially would have came to the United States and contributed to the economy here, being part of the economy in Mexico, and immigrant communities that used to head to the United States are now heading to Mexico, which means that it's actually Mexico that's economically benefiting from affordable labor force, not the United States. to the point where there are now states in Mexico with lower murder rates and higher incomes than several states in the United States. For a lot of Mexicans, they're actually better off economically and safety to stay in Mexico and not migrate to the United States. So in the meantime, here in the United States, we've seen customer service decline, industries and agriculture fail, construction work take longer than it used to. Towards the end of Obama's presidency, when it was understood that Trump had a possibility to win, before Trump even began to be president of the United States, Mexicans began to leave the United States. And ever since then, the United States has found increasing real estate prices, cost of housing has been skyrocketing. How the United States ended up with this nightmare of immigration really started before Trump became president. Americans understood that by getting rid of perhaps 10 to 15 million Mexicans that were in the United States illegally at that time, that they would receive higher incomes. But what they didn't realize is that the incomes never actually increased. This temporarily benefited individuals who were self-employed for a short period of time, but in general, incomes in the United States did not increase, but they definitely did not increase on par with the cost of living, because the contribution that illegal immigrants and migrant workers were making to the U.S. economy was far superior than the benefit of eliminating them. And while today, you may be getting paid 10 or 15% more than you were back in 2016, the cost of housing has almost doubled for those renting. It seemed like everything you were doing in the United States, you were dealing with incompetent people at hand, and the procrastination got to the point where drive-through lines took longer, access to labor force became longer. If you were hiring somebody, finding workers became more difficult. It led to an endless incapacitation of labor in the United States that came to a pinnacle with coronavirus. Not only were these workers invalid or paralyzed in a sense, but also they had a much larger liability, more propense now to get injured on the job site. Many of the inaccuracies that they did or incompetences at work led to more injuries, which led to more lawsuits, more litigation. In fact, the liability in the United States for business owners and large corporations increased dramatically after this point. Despite the obvious impact, negative impact, that getting rid of these individuals had on the U.S. economy and the repercussions that came from it, Americans continue head on wanting even stricter regulations against immigration. They simply don't want to see anybody that isn't like them. This eradication of any taints of cultural identification have come to the point where they've even started renaming businesses, renaming football teams, and anything that identifies culture in the United States or that doesn't fit a black or white narrative is simply put on cancel culture. People have even started calling people racist for doing things that they inherently do. For example, trying to relabel Latinos and Latinas as trying to eliminate the cultural aspects of the Spanish linguistics and American culture, which was fairly offensive to most Hispanics who did not want to be relabeled. But that is the cancel culture mentality of American elimination of any cultural trait. Whether Republican or Democrat, the mindset of Americans to eliminate any cultural traits that are not inherently and purely American. Called by some cancel culture, by other names as well, the reality is that in the United States, anything that is not genuinely American is being boycotted economically. Americans have become so insecure about their identity as Americans that just the notion of anything else other than themselves existing bothers, scares them, and makes them feel uncomfortable. Thus, They go after these cultures and eliminate any traces of anything cultural that doesn't exactly identify with them. It comes from a sense of insecurity, of knowing that other people perhaps could be better than them. Despite Hispanics having lower incomes and being economically marginalized and many times even extorted through their businesses by local governments, we have seen in places like California, New York, and Florida, and Texas, where Hispanic communities have the lowest murder rates, are starting to have some of the highest income communities. In other words, despite the fact that these communities are marginalized by the American system, they are still more successful. In the South, cities like Atlanta, predominantly African American, have economically dwarfed surrounding cities that are of a majority Anglo background. We've seen places like Miami economically explode. The highest real estate values in the United States are places like South Florida, California, New York, predominantly places built by immigrants. Canada has embraced these immigrant communities and allowed them to thrive, making Canada a stronger player economically globally. However, the United States sees that these immigrant communities are growing and thriving, and they feel that these communities are a threat to them because they're more productive, they're more successful, and despite not having the so quote-unquote white privilege benefits, they are still able to economically thrive better than most U.S. American native communities. Now you have the highest overdose rates that the United States has ever seen, disproportionately affecting the white population. In many communities, the white population is 2 to 4 times more likely to overdose than Hispanics or blacks. 100,000 Americans are dying from overdoses every single year, and the vast majority of those people are of the white background. States like Maine, West Virginia, that have a largest U.S.-born population, are now dealing with the worst drug crises and overdose death rates. Not only has immigration policy failed the United States, but so have drug policies. See, these two things go hand in hand. Decriminalization or legalization in the United States also took place in the same time period, and it led to the situation where we are today. Many Americans are screaming secure the border, but the tighter security gets on the border, the more powerful criminal organizations become, and thus, the more you legalize in the United States, the less avenues of income legally, the green and the white, were how most of the time these organizations made a very profitable living. But since the green and the white are no longer producing income for these organizations, they have shifted to fent and the illegal trafficking networks, which means that the more tight security is on the border, the stronger these organizations in Mexico became, as many of the people who are coming to the United States were able to before cross the border individually without the help of these organizations. Currently on the U.S.-Mexico border, if you are crossing, you have to pay these organizations, and different nationalities have different fees. But if you are crossing from Mexico to the United States today, you have to do it through the hands of an illegal organization. Organizations that in the past were focused on the green and the white, today are focused on fent and illegal immigration. Countries like Mexico and Colombia have lost hundreds of thousands of people over the decades because of the United States' stance on illegal substances. But when the United States all of a sudden decriminalizes and legalizes a lot of the things that these countries have been dying for, many of these countries simply became, resentful towards the United States. We've been fighting this war for you for all these years, and now all of a sudden you change your stance, and this forces them to do the same. The policies that the United States has put in place, both through immigration and as well as decriminalization, have turned Latin America into a more violent place than it ever was. It's made human trafficking become a very serious regional threat that did not exist before these changes took place. Criminal pipelines, began human trafficking at a scale that had never been seen before. And while in the past, immigrants were somewhat naive about the notion of coming to the United States under an illegal status, today people in Latin America understand that if they come to the United States, they're not welcome there. Much of the product that initially made its way to the United States for the first time ever started to stay in Latin America. Mexico, Central America, Colombia, the Caribbean islands started to see something, a plague that had only been bothering the United States. Latin America became unstable, and Latin America became to be in the grips of criminal organizations. Human trafficking became stronger. Massive deportations led to a larger volume of gang members in Central America. The country of El Salvador, with Nayib Bukele, their current president, started to arrest anybody who looked like a gang member and cause them legally. Whether there was due process or not, these individuals were going off the streets and sent to long prison sentences. Many of these lifelong criminals thus moved into Honduras. Honduras did the same, and thus southern Mexico became a stronghold for what was previously Central American groups. Many Cubans and Dominicans who would previously have came to the United States started to stay behind. The same thing happened with Haitians. And now in Latin America, you have a human trafficking networks that expands the entire continent of South America and engulfs the most part of Central America. Previously, when somebody came to the United States illegally, they were coming here to work. Currently, the people that are coming illegally into the United States are no longer these hard-working Mexicans. They are Cubans who will never have legal status, Dominicans who will never have legal status, Haitians who will never have legal status. Now you have an extension of the largest human trafficking network in the world connecting into the United States. No longer are immigrants crossing the border to come work in the United States. You have people who understand that they will never legally be incorporated into the society or allowed to work or exist in the country. Now, instead of these individuals coming here to work, you have individuals that are coming directly from the hand of human trafficking networks. You are seeing people being exploited, in particular females. You are seeing males, mostly instead of joining construction and agriculture, entering illegal realms of black markets within the United States. You're starting to see now immigrants that are coming to the United States that are part of international criminal organizations that are preying upon established immigrant communities in the United States. You are seeing, for example, Venezuelans are coming to the United States. They're part of criminal organizations. And in Miami, for example, it's being reported that they are extorting established Venezuelan businesses. For example, in Miami, in the area of Doral, it's being reported that a particular group out of Venezuela is now extorting Venezuelan businessmen who are U.S. citizens living in the Miami area and charging them to do business in Miami. These violent Venezuelan groups are now in the United States as illegals, extorting Venezuelan American businesses. We're also seeing the same thing happen within the Cuban community, where the new Cubans that are coming now have become a very serious safety concern for Cubans who are already here. These new immigrants that are coming now are a criminal element. People within the Cuban American community are afraid of them. People within the Venezuelan communities that were already established are terrified because the new immigrants that are coming are taking shelter within established communities, and they're going after the members of those communities with violence, extortion, threats. So while countries like Canada have grabbed the best immigrants from the world and gave them a great opportunity to be successful, Canada now has some of the safest cities in North America. In the United States, it's going from bad to worse. You've eliminated the poor, hard-working immigrants, and now you have an onslaught of criminal organizations. Dominican and Central American groups have taken up a massive percentage of the street level activity in the United States. After Hurricane Maria destroyed Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, and Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, about 1 million Puerto Ricans now reside in the state of Florida, predominantly in the Orlando area. Initially, this had a great economical impact, raising real estate values and saving entire communities in Central Florida that were becoming abandoned and going to crap. While there was initially a great economical incentive, raising real estate prices in Central Florida almost on par to South Florida, Florida now has more Puerto Ricans than Cubans for the first time ever. But all you have to do is look at the local news coming out of Central Florida, and you'll see that a vast majority of the trafficking and large busts and large criminal organizations that are being busted are Puerto Rican Americans. As the situation in Cuba deteriorates, more Afro-Cubans are coming to the United States. Originally, only white Cubans migrated to the United States, with the Afro-Cuban community rarely leaving the country. However, as things have got worse in Cuba, Afro-Cubans have started to leave Cuba, and unfortunately, many of them take naturally to crime. These are individuals who have lived under communism now for many generations. All they have known through communism is crime and theft. And this influx of Afro-Cubans to Florida and Texas has led to an incorporation of these individuals directly into criminal networks, especially considering that now they're not obtaining legal status. See, Cubans originally had legal status when they came to the United States. Now they don't. And now there aren't even that many opportunities as immigration's starting to get stricter, leading that anybody coming to America now, you get the picture. Mexico is economically becoming stronger. You now have Haitian, Cuban, Dominican. All these nationalities that originally came to the United States are now staying permanently in Mexico and creating in Mexico small communities similar to what you had here in the United States. The United States used to reap the most vigorous, the most desirable, the hardest working Latin Americans came to the United States to make it here, to live the American dream. Now you have individuals who know that if they come here, they're going to be against the law and they're not going to be given opportunities, and they decide, since they're already coming through illegal criminal networks, to work for them. And now you have an extension of Latin American crime in the United States. While the United States is dealing now with an overdose and addiction crisis, Latin America is unstable, and people that used to come for work, now you have people coming here to do illicit activities. The effects of decriminalization in Latin America, mirroring the policies of the United States, has led to an influx of power among human trafficking networks, and now more powerful and more dangerous substances are going northbound, and many of the dangerous substances that used to come to America are flooding Latin America, destroying and destabilizing the region. So while the Latin Americas have become more economically powerful, they've also become a more dangerous place to live. And while people in Latin America are now focusing on building their countries better, it is just creating bottlenecks of crime and messes in other countries. El Salvador takes a grip of their country, it floods Honduras, it floods Mexico. From the south, Mexico is being invaded by criminal organizations of Central America, and from the north as well. Many Americans feel that Mexico is bringing crime to the United States, but in reality, it's the United States that has turned Mexico into one of the most violent countries in the world. And while they've been able to create a great economy for themselves over the last few decades, they're dealing with the regional instabilities. Many of these individuals who are coming from, let's say, Venezuela, are very smart criminal masterminds. They're able to move under the radar. They're able to camouflage. They're able to really harm the United States in a very difficult to detect fashion. So while Americans are fueled by their sentimental hate for Mexicans, for example, they're really not aware of what's really happening, and that you have this influx of people into the United States that are actually destroying the economy and hurting people being ignored because the only thing that Americans are focused on is their hate for Mexicans, their hate for Central Americans. They're so focused on their hate and their sentiment that they're actually overlooking the real threats to the American powerhouse. So now we're in a situation where there are real threats. There are dangerous elements coming into the United States, and it's the United States who created the instability that led to this situation. If you could just go back to 2015, where you had all these people from Mexico that were working in the United States. They weren't bothering anybody. They weren't breaking the law on a massive level. When you let hate and sentiment and political fever determine the way you run your country and not common sense, this is the situation you end up in. The United States, it's a mess. They got what they wanted. So now the same people that complained about Mexicans working in chicken farms are worried because now eggs cost $10. You got what you wanted. They complained about Mexicans working in construction. Now they complain that housing is too expensive. What was keeping housing affordable? Mexicans working. You sure as crap aren't going to work as hard as them. People in the United States got exactly what they asked for, and now they're crying about the consequences. They wanted tighter security around the border. Great. Now these organizations that traffic people are charging 4 times more money, and now people have to go through those organizations, which means that now organizations are going to fent, which is what's killing Americans more than anything. You pretty much set off the chain of events that led to the mess you're in right now. The reason they say the border's out of control, the border's not out of control. The policies that politicians created to cater to your voting desires led to the mess you're in right now. This is exactly what you asked for. But people fail to recognize, hey, maybe we were wrong. Maybe this wasn't the right way to go about it. No, they doubled down. But now you have all this instability in Latin America created by the policies in the United States, which is leading to the fent crisis, killing 100,000 Americans every single year. Not surprisingly, it's the white communities and rural communities that are suffering the most. And the large cities aren't having this problem. This is a rural white problem. Nationally, you can break it down by county level. You can see that it's rural white counties that have the biggest problem. Large Hispanic communities, like you can see Miami County down there, Dade County, they don't have that problem because it's 70% Hispanic. Guys, remember a while back they were saying that the border was out of control? I actually went to El Paso, Texas. I talked to a spokesperson from the U.S. Border and Custom Protection Services, and they told me what the actual situation was. But of course, the truth wasn't photogenic. The truth wasn't newsworthy. So while all the other news networks were spilling out lies, I actually went to El Paso, Texas, talked to the right people, got the right information. It wasn't newsworthy. It wasn't what people wanted to hear. People don't want to hear the truth. They want to hear what matches their political narrative. And like I've told you guys before, I do not have political views. I don't vote. I've never been a registered voter. Don't care to be a registered voter. All I'm telling you, socially on the ground, this is what's taking place. You're no longer having people coming to the United States to work. People are fleeing Haiti because their country is being overrun by gangs. People are leaving the Dominican Republic because violence there is out of control. People are leaving Cuba because they're starving. And the people that are leaving Cuba now lived under communism. They didn't leave Cuba when they were able to, which means that they're most likely sympathetic to the cause of those people that never left Cuba. They weren't really leaving Cuba because they were against communism. No, they're showing up at that border now, today, because they're starving. But when they had the opportunity to leave Cuba and become a U.S. citizen, and it wasn't a problem, all they had to do was leave Cuba, they didn't leave Cuba then. They want to leave now because they're starving. This is a situation that is unfortunate for a lot of people, but in the case of Cubans like myself, we had the opportunity to leave Cuba. A lot of those Cubans, they didn't leave Cuba back then because they didn't really have a problem with that regime. They're leaving now because they're starving. These people are complete sellouts. They were in Cuba supporting that regime until they got hungry. Then they show up in Florida. Next thing you know, they're wearing a Trump hat. How do you go from being a communist to being a Republican overnight? Oh, I know why. Because this is what benefits you now. These aren't people that have core following or sentiments for anything. They're people who go with the wind. They do whatever benefits them there, right then and right now. They don't really have any loyalty. They're only looking out for their own personal interest. So are the immigrants that are coming now worse than the ones that were here before? Absolutely. You had Mexicans that were coming here to work and then go back and save some money. Now you got people fleeing countries that they can never go back to, and they're coming to a country they're never going to be a part of. That's an endless cycle of nothing. They can't go back. They can't go forward. Do you think those people care about their future? Do you think those people are working towards their future? Those people that are stuck. They're stuck in Mexico, they're stuck in the United States, or they're stuck in their home countries. They have no vision, no future. So how the crap do you think it's going to lead to something productive? It's not. It's designed for these people to fail. There was a time when immigrants could be successful. That's why you have cities like San Francisco, Miami, and New York, the greatest cities in America, all founded by immigrants. But those situations do not exist anymore. Anybody who comes to the United States right now, their outlook is absolute garbage. How can you come to a country that is not accepting you? It's not giving you any opportunity to succeed. It's just ensuring that you end up in a legal limbo that goes absolutely nowhere. So yes, the situation of immigration is definitely the worst it's ever been for anybody coming to the United States. It almost doesn't make sense, except for the fact that if they're staying in their countries, they're either going to starve, they're going to die, or they're going to be victimized by criminal organizations. So at least here in the United States, that's lesser of a threat. So unfortunately, when people are having troubles in their home countries, they're going to go somewhere else. And what's coming to the United States right now is unfortunately almost like a plague. People with no future, no opportunity, they can't go forward, they can't go backwards. And this is the situation that was created, the instability that didn't exist previously in Latin America. And unfortunately, things are probably only going to get worse in Latin America. 3 or 4 years from now, who knows what's going to be going on. People yet want to pin it down on one particular person. Before that person was president, this problem existed, and he'll be long dead. This problem will still continue. It's a regional instability. Latin America is out of control, and America isn't giving them any opportunities. A lot of times the problems in Haiti and Venezuela and Cuba, the United States is intimately compromised with why those countries are in those positions today. Thus, when you share a responsibility, you kind of have to bear some of the consequences. The United States was involved in Cuba before the regime. The United States was involved in the things that happened in Venezuela and Haiti. And when you are so deeply involved in these countries, when they have a crisis, you're going to bear some of the consequences. The United States is not innocent to what's going on in Latin America. The United States is involved in those problems. So you can't really distance yourself from the mess that you created. The United States is intimately involved with all the problems of Latin America. It's one single continent, and whether you like it or not, all these countries affect each other. Canada, Mexico, United States, Cuba, even the small countries like Haiti and the Dominican Republic, all these countries are part of this continent. Everybody's in this continent, and we all depend on each other economically and suffer together as well. You are dearly mistaken if you think that one particular politician or political party is going to resolve this situation. In the past, when immigrants came to the United States, they were admirable, hardworking people. But what's coming out of other countries now are people who really do not even understand what living in the United States entitles. And perhaps they don't even understand that they're never going to be allowed to live here legally. Their lives are going to be a completely endless legal limbo. There was a time when the United States attracted the best immigrants. Now the United States is attracting people that are leaving horrible conflicts. These people just are not going to acclimate to the economy, thus anything. They're just not prepared to live in a country of responsibility when they grew up in Haiti, when they grew up in Cuba under communism, These are individuals that are infinitely tied to criminal organizations, and they think that the best way to obtain money is through illicit methods. They're not going to come to the United States and find legal avenues for work because they don't exist. But even if they did exist, these are individuals that are coming from countries where doing what is wrong pays more, and their mentality is always leaning towards illegal activities. So quite frankly, what is coming to the United States now is similar to a plague. It's people who don't have opportunity, and even if you gave them the opportunity, they're probably not the type of people you would want to enter your country anyways. The real downfall of Latin America nowadays is the criminality. But keep in mind, US has cities like Detroit, Baltimore, that are just as dangerous as the most dangerous cities in Mexico. Birmingham, Alabama is more dangerous than 99% of the cities in Mexico. So when American cities now have violence on levels that are on par with Latin America, that doesn't really give people a lot of incentive who are economically well off in their country to come to the United States for what? To be victimized and extorted in a country that's not theirs? Even Colombia, which back in the 70s and 80s was definitely a place you didn't want to be by murder and homicide rate. Today, Indianapolis, Indiana is more dangerous than any large city in Colombia. Cincinnati, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky. Just go down the map, and most cities in the United States today, large cities, are just as dangerous as the most dangerous cities in Colombia or Mexico. So when violence in the United States is on par, and on top of that you have people dying from overdoses, there's not really that much of a safety initiative here in the United States. If people are going to say, well, if we go to the United States, we're going to be safer. That might have existed in the past, but as crime continues to grow in the United States, American cities are becoming just as dangerous as cities in Mexico, Colombia, or anywhere else in the Caribbean. Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, some of the most dangerous cities in the United States would be among the most dangerous cities in Mexico if they were in Mexico. If you told somebody right now that lived in Honduras or El Salvador, hey, you can be a United States citizen, but you have to live in St. Louis, chances are they would stay in their home country because these American cities are now more dangerous than Latin American countries. The United States has really seen a decline. You're seeing a lot of places where buildings are getting abandoned, businesses are closing, entire cities are losing population for a number of reasons. There's entire regions of the United States that instead of population growing, it's actually shrinking. You're seeing places go to crap in the United States. So that's also not much of an incentive for somebody who's well off to come to the United States. Why would somebody in Mexico come to the United States if they're successful in their country? In other words, unless you're from Haiti or Cuba, or a country that's in desperate need, you're not going to look towards the United States as a better outcome. Even people in the Dominican Republic have came to the United States. A lot of them are going back to the Dominican Republic because they say that they were actually better off in the Dominican Republic, not only economically, but sadly and embarrassingly, if they end up in the wrong city, even in safety, they're better off in the Dominican Republic. That does not say too much about the condition of safety in the United States right now. There's a lot of reasons why the United States has gone to crap, and among the top of that list, immigration and legalization policies combined have led to a situation that has made the United States a fairly crappy place to live. When immigrants were flowing freely through the United States, building houses, working affordably, food was plentiful and affordable. Housing was plentiful and affordable. But right now, there's a chokehold on everything in the United States. And the vast majority of people in the United States are suffering economically. They're not able to make it. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poor. Life becomes every day more unaffordable. Yet people cannot seem to recognize where the mistakes originated that led to this situation. When you make a mistake and do something that's wrong, it's good to identify where you went wrong. But the mentality of people in the United States is to double down on their mistakes. And instead of recognizing, hey, perhaps this wasn't the best idea, perhaps we made a mistake, now we made things worse than when they were before, They just double down on their failed ideology and thus don't expect these things to get better. I used to always say that immigrants came to the United States to make it a better place. That may have been the case 10, 15 years ago. What is coming to the United States right now is an absolute plague. If it wasn't so freaking cold in Canada, I would probably move there. If it wasn't so dangerous in Mexico, even Americans would start to move there at this point. Americans that move to smaller countries are becoming unstable quickly, so even that isn't an option. A lot of Americans, for example, moved to Ecuador because Ecuador at that time was a safe and affordable country, and now Ecuador is as dangerous as anywhere else in Latin America. One of the few things you can actually do to make sure that you and your family are living in a great place is educate yourself, make a lot of money so you can live in nicer suburban areas where to some degree it's somewhat safer than the poor areas. The rural areas are dealing with drugs more than the cities, and then you have the good old boy system, which means you can't just move to any rural part of America, and we all know the troubles and crime of the inner cities. The suburbs are kind of one of the few options people have left, but to live in the suburbs, you have to make a lot of money. It's not just the United States. Globally, if you move to another country, you're going to find similar troubles as well. There's problems everywhere. One of the best things you could do is wherever your family and the people that you love live, that's probably the best place for you. I never really understood how people would leave their families in Latin America and come over to the United States for material aspirations. And at the end of the day, one day they get hurt or they get robbed and all that goes away. They work their entire lives in the United States only to not even be able to enjoy the fruits of their hard work. Think about all the people that come to the United States, work 10, 15, 20 years of their life saving up money, and then when they leave to go back to their country, the money gets confiscated or their vehicle gets stolen. They end up losing everything they worked for. I just saw a documentary about this dude that lives like in Africa in a hut in the middle of nowhere, but he's got 3 wives and like 20 kids. And I honestly thought this guy lives happier than most people in the United States because he's got 3 wives, 20 freaking kids, like 100 cows. What else do you need to be happy? Sometimes we make our lives so complicated. We go to another country thinking that things are going to be better there. But in reality, the best thing you can have is your family and the people that love you. So many people reach out, move to another country, put their lives in danger. Even after they make that money, they move back to their countries and then they become a target because people think they got money. It really doesn't resolve anything. People think that by coming to the United States, make more money, they're going to make their lives better. But in reality, it really doesn't. What makes your life better is to be able to spend time with the people you love, even if it's in poverty. The American dream really doesn't exist anymore. Most people in America today are indebted, enslaved, and even if they're off well economically, then they're still dealing with the plagues of addiction, with the plagues of the fact that the family doesn't exist in the United States. There's something about the United States that just simply deteriorates your family. When we came to America, we were like this close-knit family. Now everybody kind of does their own thing. This country really has a way of destroying the fiber of families. I don't know what it is. Is it the fact that every month your bills are reoccurring again? And you can't really help people one time because then you're obligated to help them forever. But there's something about the American system that just grinds away at the fiber of what is the family. Back in the 40s and 50s, American families had 4 or 5 kids. It was a different type of America. But the world that we're living in today, most young couples are going to tell you, we're not going to have kids. Why would we want to put kids into this world with what the schools are teaching, with what the states are trying to force the schools to do? Why would you want to bring your kids into this type of world? People are choosing not to have kids, not to have families, because they look at it no longer as a blessing, but as a hardship because of the type of situations that are going on. So I would advise anybody thinking about coming to the United States because they think they're going to have a better life here, probably reevaluate your priorities and maybe place your family higher on those priorities, because monetary things can come and they go. You can have an accident and everything that you've worked for will be completely gone overnight. I encourage people to be productive, work hard, and accomplish things in their life, but don't let it overwhelm you and don't ever let it overshadow more important things like spending time with your family, because in the endeavor of coming to the United States and reaching the quote unquote the American dream, a lot of people have died in deserts, a lot of people have drowned in rivers, drowned in oceans, and even those that make it, when they go back, they find out that perhaps instead of chasing money, they should have spent more time with their families instead. Lessons learned too late.